Hi everyone and welcome to my first ever Patreon exclusive video. Thank you so much for subscribing on Patreon. It really does mean the world to me, and it means that I could keep making videos like this and really put more time into it so I can teach you guys as well as I possibly can. This is going to be my most popular YouTube video, but I'm redoing it. I'm redoing the voiceover and I'm supplying you with the line art and the high quality reference photos so you can follow along. And I've also slowed it all down. It's still going to be speeded up because I recorded it like that, so I can't slow it down. But videos in the future will be real time. I just thought this would be a really helpful video for anyone who wants to do the dog. I did have this idea from a patron who asked me for the line art for this, and I realised that I still have it on my computer, so I'm going to give it to you guys exclusively. No one else is going to have it, so use it for your practice as much as you like. This is Dave, he's the channel mascot. Say hi, Dave. So jumping straight into it, here are the tools that I used to create these portraits. When I first started, I only used mechanical pencils, so if you haven't got all this, don't worry, you can literally just use one pencil if that's all you have. So this tool I'm holding here is a blending tool. It's from Jackson's Art. It's basically one of those old cheap eyeshadow applicators on a big stick, so I wouldn't really recommend paying the price I did for this, but I use it to blend loose graphite, which I use in this drawing to get down the shadowed areas right in the beginning, just to map that out. It's not great for achieving dark shadows as it's quite light when it hits the paper, as you'll see. This one's just a silicone blending tool. It's really nice for getting really smooth blends in smaller areas. It works on the surface of the paper, whereas the paper stumps work to blend the graphite into the paper. So this is a really nice tool. I really recommend getting this. Them two both come in a set, so I'll link that in the description below. And I'm sure most of you have used these before. They're just regular paper stumps, great for blending larger areas. Onto the shadows. This is just a black polychromos from Faber Castell. I really like using these to get down some really dark shadows in the beginning, like the nostrils where no light hits those areas. So you really need a dark tone there. This one's basically a fatter version of that. The only thing with using these is that you do have to go back over the top with graphite, just so that the pencil shine on the whole portrait is consistent. This next pencil, it's a Staedtler Mars Lumograph pencil. These are meant to have a higher carbon content so that they're darker, but to be honest, I haven't really found that they're much different to normal pencils. It is a nice pencil, 6B pencil, but I don't know, it's not much different, I found. And this is just a regular 8B pencil from Faber Castell. Now onto the mid-tones. These are pencils that I found in the drawer. I'd never used these before this, but they're really nice for getting a sharp point, so I quite enjoyed using them on this portrait. They're just like woodless graphite pencils, I think they're called, in all different grades there. This one is a Faber Castell 2H. This is what I use for most of the lighter fur areas and where there's reflections. 2H is probably my favourite grade for this. I also use H and B for that. And onto the main star of the show. These are what I've been using for about 10 years. I used to only use these, so you know, if this is all you can afford, then just get these. I think they're about £20 and they come in a pack of 3. So it's 0.5mm, the one I use the most. And it also comes with a 0.35mm, which I found just snapped so much, so I gave up with it. But yeah, I use 2 B leads in these, and I'll link all of this in the description below. They're really great for small details, so you don't have to keep sharpening them. I hate sharpening pencils so much. I recently bought a really expensive electric sharpener which broke within a week, so I'm trying to get that sorted out. And yeah, these are just the leads that I use with those pencils. I really like this brand, Pentel, and then there's Koh-i-Noor. I've never known how you say that, but these ones are quite good as well, really cheap. On to the highlights now. So we've got a Faber Castell Perfection rubber pencil. It's basically like a coloured pencil eraser but in a pencil, so you can sharpen it to a really fine point and you can use this to get highlights in the fur. And for the smaller like specks of highlight, I use this on like the eyes. 0.8 Jelly Roll. They're really good. I prefer the 0.5 one because it's a bit thinner, but I find the 0.5 runs out so fast, so I've given up. And I just have a paintbrush to the side whenever I do graphite portraits to brush away any rubbings, because if you use your hand it's just going to smudge. So now I'm going to show you how I render some of the fur textures. I basically use this hand movement. It's really hard to describe in a video. So you start with no pressure, in the middle you have the most pressure, and then at the end you go back to no pressure again. So it's kind of like a up and down movement with the pencil. And then I basically just carry this technique on for the entire portrait really. Sorry if my voice has just changed. This is a different time. I've just carried on the video and I've got a cold now, so yeah, as I'm showing you here, it's just faster versions of that movement all together, and I think there's probably about 1 million of these in every portrait, but I find that this gives the softest fur texture rather than just doing, you know, one directional lines. And as you're doing this, you should kind of mix up the direction that you're going in, because then obviously fur, it doesn't go in one direction, it's not perfect, so really make sure you've got different directions in that same area to make it look the most realistic that it can be. And obviously for lighter fur, all I do is release some of that pressure. As you can see here, I'm just repeating that over and over again, and we've got a nice little section of fur here which looks really nice and soft. And the natural placement of the pencil will mean that you've got some lighter strokes and some highlights within those strokes, which can look like certain strands are reflecting the light, which is just what we want. And now I'm going to show you a different technique that I use. I use this a lot on snouts and places where fur is kind of parting at a different angle. Sorry, my rat is chewing his wooden thing. Dave, stop it. Of all times. So yeah, basically I just do little triangle shapes, and that it looks like the hair is kind of parting, which is what would happen when the hair is like going over a lump or a bump in the fur. So if you've got like the snout, for example, it's curved and the hair won't just be going in one direction, it'll be separating and, you know, compensating for those hills and valleys in the dog's face. I'm not on it today. So right now, after that I just use the silicone stump to blend out any lighter areas, because that wanted to be a darker section. And here I'm showing how I do like a longer fur with a reflection in it. So you start with the harder texture on the outside, and then you just stroke inwards, releasing pressure as you go inwards. And here's some loose graphite that I'm applying with a makeup sponge blender thing. This is funny because I made this video so long ago, and now I'm just finishing it, and so I'm just kind of narrating as I go along. So here we have the pencil eraser. This is the pink one. They have a white one as well, which actually works better with graphite. The pink one is meant to be for coloured pencil, but yeah, I recommend the white one and the pink one actually, just to see which one you prefer. I use this technique here for lighter fur. So you get the graphite down first and then you just erase and make highlights that way. Can be a really handy tool. And then I'm just adding some shadows to further enhance that section. This is a really good technique for white dogs. For paper as well, this looks like quite a textured paper I'm using here. I think it was just a scrap that I had, but the smoother the paper the better if you're looking for that real smooth look to your portrait. It can be too smooth though, and sometimes really smooth papers like the Frisk smooth paper, it doesn't take many layers because it doesn't have much of a tooth and it can start to rub away. So I would recommend something like Bristol Board Smooth or Bristol Board Vellum. Or you can get some really cheap ones as well. But anyway, so onto the dog now. So starting off, I'm just going to go in with some loose graphite here, and I'm just using it's like a eyeshadow applicator, but it's not. This one's from Jackson's Art and it's a bit longer, but you can get these eyeshadow applicators in a huge bag for like £2 or something from eBay. So I'll link the eBay thing below because that's a much better option to get them for your money. So yeah, I just mapped out some of the darker areas with that loose graphite. And I'm now going in with the darkest area that I can see on the left, and that is the middle of the ear there. And I went in with just a dark leaded pencil, I think it was about a 5B maybe, and then I just blended it out with a blending paper stump and also my silicone stump. So here you can see me using the first round of the triangle taper stroke that I showed you in the beginning. With the darker areas, I like to work in the negative, so I will start with the dark area and then go in with triangles into the lighter area, if that makes sense. So as you can see there, I have used triangles from the darker area into the lighter area, and that's given the illusion that there's hairs overlapping that darker area. So we are just continuing with that triangle stroke, and they're a bit longer on this area because the fur's a bit longer, and the fur on that ear, if you think about feeling the dog's ear, it's so velvety soft, so you really want to think about that when you're drawing the ears like this. So the fur strokes are going to be a little bit longer than the rest of the drawing. And here I'm just doing the behind area, and because that's a bit further back in the photo, I'm trying to not blur it, but it's not going to be as sharp as the front of the ear. So I've used that silicone tool just to kind of make the edges not too sharp. But yeah, and on the end of the ear, there's a shadow. There's more of a shadow than on the middle of the ear. So I am basically filling in the area with graphite, but I'm doing it in that triangle motion. So I'm not just filling in the area with a pencil as you would if it was just, you know, the area in the middle there of the dark area. I'm still going in with the triangle technique, but I am using it really heavily and more densely so that the area is more shadowed. So just, sorry, that's Dave drinking out of his bottle. This is going to be a regular occurrence in my Patreon videos, it seems like. He likes to wait until I'm into like a good bit and then he'll start chewing on something or drinking something, but you know, there we are. So we are onto the head now, and I'm still doing that triangular stroke. How many times am I going to say triangular in this video? Who knows? But because the head is a sapphire, it's going to be kind of sticking outwards rather than, it's not, because the type of fur that this Jack Russell has, it's not flat on his head like a staffy, for example. It's kind of protruding outwards, so the strokes aren't going to be kind of going round the head. They're kind of coming off the head at an angle. So yeah, it's really worth studying your reference photo and thinking how that fur would actually feel to stroke it. And if it's furrier, then the fur isn't going to be stuck to the head like it would be on a staffy, for example. It's going to be more tilted upwards and still following the shape of the skull because it's obviously round. But yeah, it's going to be more outwards rather than stuck to the head, if you get me. So I'm just going in with the strokes, and then I'm softening it with a blending stump as I go, and I'm working in the negative here with that little white strip on his head, just as I did with the fur that protrudes over the dark bit of the ear. So I'm doing the triangles and they're cutting into that white space, and that's going to make a really good effect of the white fur coming over the dark fur, which is what we want because that's what he has. Please excuse my naff narration for this video, guys. I promise it will get better. I'm thinking I'll actually just talk as I draw for my Patreon videos, and that's going to be so much easier, and I actually think that it's going to be more of an insight into how I'm actually thinking as I draw. So I think that's what I'm going to be doing for the future tutorials. So for this eye area, I'm just going round there, really looking at that reference. And from the middle of the eye, they kind of have fur that goes inwards, like towards their nose. So you just do that with the triangle stroke again. And for the eye here, I've first of all gone in with the darkest areas, and that gives you a really good map of where everything else is going to go. And it gives you a good idea of how the final eye is going to look. So all I do there is just go in with the darkest areas first, and then I'll map out where those highlights are going. I think a common mistake we can make with highlights is to make them brighter than they actually are, because to our eye they look brighter because they're next to such a dark place in the eye. So I tend to knock it back a shade or two, unless it's the main highlight, which I like to keep nice and bright. But for those secondary highlights, you know, the ones that aren't the brightest and whitest, I knock it back a shade just to kind of bring it all back to realism rather than making it pop too much, because that's just not what happens in real life. Those secondary highlights tend to be bouncing off the ground or bouncing off things around them, and that's why they usually like the shape of whatever is in the room. So I'm just darkening up that area there, still using the triangle technique, and I'm just going over that original base layer that I did and just darkening up areas that need darkening up. Darkening up. Now he has some whiskers coming out of the white area in the middle there, so I just went in with a rubber pencil to rub away some graphite from his head. You can also do this with a jelly roll pen, but for this case I thought it would look more kind of put together if it was just the same colour as the white area. So I just used a rubber pencil, and I think I just used I used a jelly roll for that second whisker there, so you can see the difference side by side. Now this area of the dog, it's kind of in between the eyes, is usually the most complicated on any animal, because it follows such a strange fur pattern where it goes outwards, downwards and upwards all at the same time in different areas, and you've got to really map it out. So I recommend for this area really helping yourself and mapping out when you come to your first sketch, just map out where those directions are, because it's going to be much easier when you come to do the drawing. And yeah, just really keep that in mind and look at your reference photo and see on your particular dog what area that is going towards. For the white areas, I did want some detail in there, so I just used a 2H pencil to get some little hair strokes, as you can see by the left eye there. So going in with this second eye, you can really see the process I take. So I'm going in with I think it's a Mars Lumograph pencil in 6B there, just to map out where those really dark areas are. I love these pencils. They're not as black as I thought they would be, but they're really good. So if you want some nice dark graphite pencils, I would definitely get a few of those. And I'm blending a lot with my silicone blending stump, and then just going in with some details in the iris there. And as you can see, I've got my main highlight, which is on the right, and then I've got some secondary highlights which are in the middle, and they're much less bright than that main highlight. So I'm just going back and forth between blending and pulling little details out. With the iris, it can look really impressive if you just pull out the tiniest little highlights in those details. For like, you know, if you zoom in really, really close up to the eye, you can see all sorts of patterns. So if you just suggested that a tiny bit, it can take the realism so much further than it was before. But don't overdo it, because then it doesn't look too realistic and it can take away from the character of the dog. So less is more in that case, I think. So for this bit around the eye, again, you can really see me going in the direction of the fur. Now this is so important, especially around the eye. It's kind of like a spiral around the centre of the eye. I'd really study this. If you haven't really thought about it before, I'd really study your photo and maybe even map out, like on top of it on Photoshop or something, what direction those furs are going in. There's usually some texture on that little bald bit around their eye, so pay attention to that. This video is really speeded up, but that's not how the rest of the tutorials will be. It's just because this is the only footage I had of this video. But for the YouTube video, I speeded it up even more, so this is a lot slower than the YouTube video, as you can tell by the time. I'm jumping around here. Now I kind of just jump around depending on what I feel like needs some work, just to get the energy of the animal like more get it going, you know. I really work on how I feel rather than steps, but I am going to try and make it more step-based in my tutorials here on Patreon, because I've started learning airbrush and I know how it is to like just pick up something completely new, and I really like to learn in steps, so I am going to focus on doing that a bit more. So I'm going more into the head triangle technique here, and as you can see I'm going up rather than sticking completely to the head. So it's like the beginning of that strand is on the skull, but then the top of it is flaring upwards, so I'm kind of going around and up. As you can see, a lot of my work is based highly around the details. I've always been like this. I remember when I first started, all I used was that mechanical pencil, and I would just focus completely on details. I've had a lot more thoughts around tone and stuff since then, which has kind of brought everything together. But I did used to only use that one mechanical pencil that I'm using there. I was using a lot of this big paper blending stump for this one, and it's really good for bigger areas. The silicone blending tool is better for smaller areas like the eyes, whereas the big paper stumps are really good for creating that soft look in the fur. I'll leave a link to both of them in the description. I'm using quite a lot of that Mars Lumograph pencil, which has made me realise that I haven't used it in such a long time, and I've just pulled it out of my pot here, and it's a lot shorter now. But yeah, it is the 6B. It's the only one I bought actually. So I'm really focusing on just observing that fur. When I'm working on portraits, I'm zoomed right into that reference photo, so I'm not actually looking at the bigger picture, I'm just looking at the tiny details in that area that I'm working on. And onto the second ear now. So I'm just using a woodless graphite stick here, which I don't usually use, so I don't know why I'm using it there, but you can use any pencil for this. So I just put in that main shadow there, and I blended it out with a silicone stump. It's a different approach I took to the first ear, but I think it's more in shadow and there's less detail visible, so I just really wanted to get that dark tone in. And for this ear, the middle of the ear was actually lighter than the top bit because of the light direction. So I just put that in really loosely and then blended it out with a paper stump. Because of the light direction, the fur that was overlapping the lighter area there is darker, so that's quite an easy step to do. I would say for like if you're just doing hair strokes, the main thing is to make sure that every hair stroke isn't like the same direction, the same length, the same curve, because then you can get a really robotic looking drawing. But obviously animals' fur is never all in one direction. It's never going to be perfect because it's just not nature, is it? I mean, it's perfect on its own, but it's not perfect as how humans think of perfect. So yeah, make sure every stroke you're doing isn't the exact same as the last. Humans are really biased towards making things the same. Like if we do one good hair, we're like, oh, I'll do that over and over again and it'll be a great drawing. But no, that will just make for a really boring looking drawing and it won't look as natural as it could. So for the head here, instead of just working in layers, like one detail by one detail, I'm mapping out the direction really solidly first, so then I can work in sections, but also know that the direction is all going in the same direction. Direction is all going in the same kind of flow. It saves issues later on. So for bigger areas like the head where there's lots of detail, I do map out first. And I've done the triangle technique, and now I'm just going in with some shadows just to really solidify that detail and make sure there's enough variety in the tones. When it gets to this stage where I'm about 80% done with an area, I kind of do jump around because it brings up things that need tweaking. So don't be afraid to just go wherever you see something. To pick out some of those really dark bits in between the details, I'm using that Mars Lumograph pencil again. Now when I come to a new white area, like how I'm working on there, the side of the face, I do like to just get a few details down just to really get a sense of where all that fur's going. Really lightly, and then I can go in confidently with the darker pencil and the mechanical pencil, because the mechanical pencil does actually scratch the paper because it's so sharp, but that's what makes such a sharp point on those details. But you don't want to go in with it straight away if it's an area like this, because it could make some marks that you don't want, and they're quite hard to get rid of. So I'm just finishing up with this ear here, darkening up that area. And for that little highlight on the very edge of the ear flap there, I used the rubber pencil. And they're really good for that kind of highlight, just touching the very edge of a surface, or in this case the ear. And that will be in the link below. I really love ears because the hair is just a break from doing the rest of the face, because the hair direction is in a complete different way. And one thing I did want to bring up is that when I'm drawing stuff like this, I do move around the table, I move around the drawing to get the angle for my arm that's going to be the most comfortable, and it's going to make the most natural looking curves. So I actually stand up and I will lean over the table, probably not good for your back, but at all different angles, and that really helps with the flow of the fur to look the most natural. Because we've all got one side that we're much better at. Oh, and there I'm using a black polychromos pencil just for the really, really dark areas like the nostrils, and I add a touch at the top of the eyes. The one thing to do if you are using a wax-based pencil like the polychromos is to go over that area with graphite afterwards, just so that the shine is all consistent with the whole piece, because otherwise you'll get a really matte looking nostril or a matte looking shadow, and it won't blend in with the rest of the kind of shine that the graphite gives. I actually think the noses are probably my favourite thing to do in a graphite portrait. So I go in with the kind of mid-tones and I just map out where the main highlights are going to be going. I usually go in with like I'd say maybe a HB or a B, and that's just to map out where the kind of shadows, mid-tones and highlights are going to be going. And that's the main thing with the noses, because you've got the main shadow tends to be on the front plane of the nose, which is the bit that's facing like either you or the ground, and the light normally hits the top of the nose, so the bit that's facing you is going to be more in shadow in typical lighting. But yeah, I'll do a really in-depth tutorial on my Patreon about noses, because this is obviously a really fast version and it's quite small as well. But yeah, I went in with the rubber pencil there just to bring out some of those little highlights, and I would usually go in with some heavy detail on the noses as well, because they've got a really great hexagonal pattern on the noses that I really like to get into. So yeah, like I said, I'll do a full tutorial on noses on my Patreon. The fur around the noses always really confuses me, because there's less fur there, so you can see the darkness of the skin underneath that tends to go into the nose. But there is some fur, so you kind of have to, it's really, oh look, there I am going in with a hexagonal pattern. I thought I was going to miss out on this one, but I didn't. This is actually a really easy method to do this, that I use on all of my portraits. Well, it's not really easy, but once you know like the steps to do it, it's really applicable to every portrait. So yeah, I'll do a really in-depth video on that. And I just went in with the Jelly Roll white gel pen there just to pick out some highlights, and then I'm going in with the blending tool to take that down a notch and blend it in with the rest of the nose, because if I just left it as that gel pen it would look really silly. There's only a little bit of detail on this one because there was only a small bit that was hitting the light. I didn't want to go too far with it because otherwise it would take over the portrait. Oops, sorry, that was me clicking my neck. So bad. So yeah, I think I'm mainly done with that nose now. I tend to finish an area by about 80% and then I'll go on to another area. Because most of the time we overwork things and we don't need to, because we're so laser focused on that area. Whereas if you then move on to the next area, you'll probably see that you didn't need to add anything else to that area. It was just the areas around it that looked unfinished to you. So you started overworking an area, and I do this all the time. So I tend to limit myself to 80% completion, and then I'll move on to the next area. And then I can always come back to it if it needs more detail, but it just helps to stop overworking the paper and putting too much detail and too much time into one area, which I think we can all do. I think this drawing took me about 25 hours altogether. It was only an A5 piece as well, so you can imagine how long the A3 ones take. This area tends to take me the most time because there's so many different directions the fur goes in. And you've really got to pay attention, because otherwise the whole face will end up looking off if you don't get the direction right. Just like around the eyes, it kind of comes outwards from the nose and then around the nose in all directions. Just going in with some more loose graphite there just to get some mapping out, to get it more clear in my head. I don't tend to use the loose graphite that much in my portraits anymore, but for a piece like this it was really good to map out because the lighting was quite specific. I don't really like how messy it is and it can really stick to the paper if you've got like if you've touched the paper with your finger and then you put that graphite on, it will give you like a fingerprint. So I tend to avoid the graphite. But I think I might start using it again a bit more on my portraits, because it does help you to map stuff out and also give you that smooth kind of shadow underneath the fur. Sometimes you don't want the bright white paper to be underneath the triangle technique, because it will look like there's like white and black fur together kind of thing, like mottled together, whereas sometimes you just want a solid pattern, a solid colour of the fur. So it's good then to put a shadow underneath it, so then you're not left with any of that white paper shining through. It's quite weird to have to describe exactly what I'm doing, because I don't really think about it when I'm doing it, but it's actually quite a learning curve for me as well. Softening things out with that eyeshadow applicator. So I'm getting towards the end here. It's always nice when you see the light at the end of the tunnel. And this whole area on the bottom of his face was in the light, so there wasn't that much detail there because it was white as well. So I think the bulk of the face is beginning to come together now. I was really looking forward to doing the collar on this one because, as I said in my YouTube video, when they have collars that are really good quality in your pictures, you can really take advantage of that. If you get the material perfect, well, not perfect, as perfect as you can get it, it will take the realism of the whole piece to a whole new level. So yeah, really take advantage if you've got any fabrics in your photo, and take as much time on them as you did with the rest of the portrait. For that bit under the eye there, it really curves around the skull, so you want to, and then there's like a shiny bit that goes from the curvature under the eye where the light's hitting, because there's the cheekbone of the dog right there. So that's something to think about. For the line art for this piece, the way you can trace it is just bring it up on your laptop or computer screen, stick the paper to the screen and then just trace it. That's completely fine. I do ask though that because this was a client photo, maybe if you post it anywhere, if you post your attempts anywhere, just mention me in the comments. And this, obviously you won't be allowed to sell anything that you've made from this. I've recently been looking into like copyright and stuff like that, and it's blown my mind because I've grown up just copying stuff off the internet, anything. I've never sold anything that I've copied off the internet, but I've been looking into like copyright, and you have to pay for so much these days. Well, not these days, it's probably always been like that. But for practice, you can basically use whatever you want as long as you credit the photographer. I was thinking as well that I could share some doggy reference photos that maybe I've taken or my clients have taken, some really good ones for your practice on here as well in like full quality, because that's probably going to be really helpful for some people, just to have some really good photos to work from. I would say as well, if you are practicing for becoming a portrait artist or a pet portrait artist, if you use photos from people you know, their dogs, if you can take them yourself, that's perfect. Take a really good picture of their dog and then practice for a portrait and then give it to them as a gift maybe. And then that starts off the word of mouth. That's how I started. Because someone's going to see that and be like, oh, I want one of my dog. And then you can maybe say, okay, it's your starting price, whatever your starting price may be. I think I started at around £40. I was 13. But word of mouth is going to be your most powerful marketing technique when it comes to stuff like this. So yeah, gift your practice pieces, and you never know where it could lead. So I'm just continuing here with the triangle technique. You guys are going to have this drummed into your head when you start watching my videos. Triangle, triangle, triangle. It's basically just two strands of hair parting, and then you've got the shadow in the middle of that part, which is going to look like there's two hairs kind of overlapping each other. So I'm onto the collar now, and I'm basically just getting the tones down and then blending it in with the silicone tool, which was perfect for this. I was really keen to get onto the collar and the body, so I kept going back and forward. Just perfecting those areas where the white hair is merging into the darker hair in the middle. This part where the whiskers come out near the nose is quite crucial to get right, because if you there's a common mistake is making too many holes for the whiskers, which is something I used to do a lot. If you get too into that detail and you start making holes that aren't there, not holes, sorry, the little dark bits where the whiskers tend to come out, then it can look off. So really look at your reference and make sure the whiskers that you draw are coming out of those darker little spots, because that's where the hair is parting and there's a thicker, what even is a whisker though, like, is it a hair? It's like a thick hair, so the hair is coming out of the darker area, and you can see on the side of the face there as well, there's two little whiskers coming out from the side of his face, and there tends to be whiskers coming out the top of the brow bone as well. Why don't we have whiskers? I guess we do. We have like facial hair, don't we? If you're a man. Or if you're a female. We've all got some moustaches growing. So going in with the collar here, and as I said, I'm just putting some tone down with the graphite and then blending it with the silicone stump. The silicone stump is really great for blending like really smooth areas, because it blends the graphite over the paper rather than into the paper, so the paper stump tends to blend stuff into the paper, which gives less of a smooth appearance, whereas the silicone tool, sorry I'm just watching myself, the silicone tool kind of glazes over the paper and makes a really smooth, nice effect. So I'd really recommend getting both of those blending tools and just seeing which one you prefer. I use both. So I'm leaving out the areas where there's patterns on the collar. There's a paw print there and a bone there. And for that metal ring, I might do a whole tutorial on collars actually, because they're so fun. I really love doing the metal ring because there's always quite distinct highlights that come around on there. For that bright highlight there on that metal ring on his collar, I've used a white jelly roll pen. So now I'm just making the lines of that material, and on most collars these are present, so it's just lines going downwards horizontal on the collar, but pay attention to the angle of the collar and the angle of the dog, because that will determine where the lines are going. Don't just do them like straight down, because that will look stupid. But yeah, they have the little lines of material, and then there's a highlight in between each line, so you can take this as far as you want really. And the little buckle there on the collars, they tend to be plastic, so they're going to be reflecting the light on one side, and they're really smooth in texture on the top, so the silicone blending tool is perfect for those. And now I'm just adding little hairs that go over the top of that collar with the white jelly roll to make them really nice and bright and stand out. The jelly roll is a really great tool. I go through a lot of them because they tend to dry out quite fast because they're water-based. Any water-based white pigment will dry out really fast in the pen, but I do find that it's the best. You can get it in all sorts of thicknesses as well. I do like the 0.5 one, but they dry out the fastest because they're so small. So the 0.8 is a happy medium between drying out time and thickness, but I do like the 0.5 for really fine details. I'll link everything in the description. So his body here is white, so I am just doing the bit that's in shadow, and then the bit that's in light I probably won't actually do much there at all, other than maybe putting a bit of loose graphite down and then creating some hairs with the rubber pencil. But you want to make sure that this area actually looks white and not darker than like the dark fur on the face, for example. So a good way to make sure you're not going too dark is, like I said, putting some graphite down, blending it, and then adding in hairs with the rubber pencil. I seem to have stopped. So I'm using a really light pencil there, I think it's 2H. And I'm just adding in some fur texture that's in the shadows. I did this drawing about a year ago now. I think it was 2020, June. So, 2 years, wow, time's flying so much. Since then I've had a lot of coloured commissions, more so than graphite commissions. So, yeah, I haven't done much graphite since then. Well, I have done quite a lot, but not comparatively to how I was when I was just doing the graphite portraits, obviously. So yeah, I remember this portrait being really fun to do. There was no like annoying bits that I wished would end. So yeah, I really recommend giving this portrait a go. There's lots of different skills you can practice with it, and I've given you the full quality reference photo to use. So if you do use these, please let me know and send me a picture and I can critique it for you. I promise I won't be mean in these critiques. I will keep them very positive, and then I will just give you like a point or two that you can improve on for next time. But I can't wait to see your work. It's going to be so fun, and I've got my next video coming very soon. I was going to upload it this week, but it's taken a lot longer than I thought, and I've got to send the commission to the customer as well, so I thought this would be a good little introduction, as it's got all the different hair strokes that I use at the beginning as well, so I did want this on my Patreon. So I really hope you like this, guys. Do leave me a comment, and again, thank you so much for joining me on here. I'm so excited to start this journey, and you guys are the first ones here, so thank you so much. I haven't even announced it to the public yet, so the fact that you're here means so much to me, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.